This is going to be one of those videos where I don't have a script for at all. I have nothing written down for this one. And I just want to talk about one really interesting thing that I found in the book and how I think this actually depicts what J.R. Tolkien thinks as the fountain of youth. The way that you can I don't know. I don't quite have the words for it, which is why I want to do this video specifically, because I want to kind of like just talk around this idea until I feel like I have the words. Usually I just do that by writing, but I don't know why. I just kind of feel like in a different mood today, and I just kind of want to chat about this because I think this is maybe Tolkien's solve for aging. There's a few different things that it mentions, and throughout the entire first few chapters of the Return of the King, there has been this huge dichotomy between Denethor and I was going to say Faramir. Well, yes, but Denethor and Theoden. Now, these are two rulers of their respective kingdoms. One is a steward of Gondor, and the other is the king of Rohan, the king of the Mark. And it's really interesting how both of them are depicted as far as how they look and their age. But there is one thing that he does specifically with three characters in this book, with Aragorn, Théoden, and with Denethor, that I want to talk about. Because when I was reading the Houses of Healing chapter, there was this line that talks about the healers and the lore and the leech masters, the Leechcraft of Gondor. And they say they've been able to pretty much solve everything except for one thing. And it says this. So at last Faramir and Eowyn and Meriadoc were laid in beds in the Houses of Healing. And there they were tended well. For though all lore was in these latter days fallen from its fullness of old, the Leechcraft of Gondor was still wise, and skilled in the healing of wound and hurt. In all such sickness as east of the sea mortal men were subject to. Save old age only, for that they had found no cure, and indeed the span of their lives had now waned to little more than that of other men. And those among them who passed the tale of the 50 years with vigor were grown few, save in some houses of purer blood. Now, I think this is really talking about how the Númenóreans had longer lifespans than the people of Men of Gondor. And what the Leechcraft people are trying to do in Gondor, what the lore masters are trying to do, or not the lore masters, what the healers are trying to do is trying to figure out how to get, I guess, purer blood into some of these people in Gondor so that they can live longer. I think there's a clear correlation with that. But I also think that this is cosmetic as well, and that it's how a person looks. And they're trying to solve the idea of, someone sent this video in the Discord I think yesterday or 2 days ago, about what Tolkien, his whole entire thesis for why he really wrote Lord of the Rings. And he talked about how everything is really centered around death, which is such an interesting idea because no one can avoid it. It's something that all of us are going to have to endure sometime. And there's this idea in, I think, some of Tolkien's writing for how you die well and how you die poorly. And Théoden and Denethor are that example. And within that idea of death comes this idea of how you look when you die. I think it might sound vain and it might sound cheesy, but I think it's really paramount to what Tolkien is actually trying to communicate in this chapter. Because you have these two characters' deaths. In the previous one, in the Pyre of Denethor, you have Denethor's death. And his description, and it's really interesting too, because Aragorn, when he goes in the passing of the Grey Company, and he looks into the Palantir, and he has this battle with the will of Sauron, he comes out of that looking old and decrepit. It says his face was like sagging, and he just looked old and worn out. And there's an image that I'll post on this of the only artwork that could really find of the passing of the Grey Company, and this old man right here is Aragorn. Now, if he's looking into the Palantir and just one time after he looks this old, imagine how old Denethor must look. And it's interesting because in the previous chapter, during his death, when he's going kind of crazy, there's this section where it keeps saying the light is flickering on his face and he almost looks mad. And again, it says this, and this is the moment right when he breaks his staff. It says, "Then Denethor leaped up on the table And standing there wreathed in fire and smoke, he took up the staff of the stewardship that lay at his feet and broke it on his knee. Casting the pieces into the blaze, he bowed and laid himself on the table, clasping the palantir with both hands upon his breast. And it was said that ever after, if any man looked in that stone, unless he had a great strength of will to turn it to other purposes, he only saw 2 aged hands withering in flame. Now it's interesting that Tolkien puts the word aged hands, because Denethor looks old and decrepit. Pippin had this revelation when he first saw him that he looked old. He almost looked older than Gandalf, and Gandalf is 2,000, I think he's like 2,000 years old, maybe older than that. Gandalf is an old dude. And for Denethor to look older than Gandalf is significantly depressing for him. He just looks old and decrepit. And yes, this is partially because he is old and partially because he's looking into the Palantir, but this is a guy who is dying and he has no youth left in him. And it's not just like the youth of like a cosmetic look. It's like the youth of, Tolkien writes this about Theoden, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, but it's like the youth of like spirit. Like when you die, like even when my grandparents died, I remember when my grandmother died, all of our family kind of stood around her body, and it was like after they had, you know, done all the cosmetic stuff and it was an open casket, we all looked and were like, she looks better than she did in years. She just looked young and youthful. She was ready to go, and she just had this like almost like this deathly glow about her. I know it sounds strange, but I think Theoden is experiencing the same thing. And I think, again, this is Tolkien kind of talking about how to die well and how to die with youth still in you. Not that that's the ultimate goal, but I think to some extent that it is, because Theoden's death, he has this note here where he talks about it, and let me find it. Then the Prince Imrahil and Eomer of Rohan left him and passed through the city in the tumult of people and mounted to the citadel. And they came to the hall of the tower, seeking the steward, but they found his chair empty. And before the dais lay Theoden, king of the Mark, upon a bed of state. And 12 torches stood about it, and 12 guards, knights both of Rohan and Gondor. And the hangings of the bed were of green and white. But upon the king was laid the great cloth of gold up to his breast, and upon his unsheathed sword, and at his feet his shield. The light of the torches shimmered in his white hair like sun in the spray of a fountain, but his face was fair and young, save that a peace lay on it beyond the reach of youth, and it seemed that he slept. Now that is the piece that I'm talking about, because in both of these stories, again, I think Tolkien is really comparing and contrasting these two characters, because at the time of their death, they both have this fire that is glowing on their face. Theoden has it while he's dead, but his face looks young and youthful. And his face was fair and young, save a peace that lay beyond it, or that lay on it beyond the reach of youth. That is something that Theoden seems to have striven for. And it's interesting too, because in the previous time in his life, when he was under the sorcery and the Leechcraft, wow, my lighting is going crazy today because it's a cloudy day. Under the sorcery and Leechcraft of Wormtongue, he looked old and decrepit. And then Gandalf came and he healed him. And ever since that day, Theoden has looked younger and younger and younger, to the point that his death, he's actually seeming to be ageless. He has this peaceful youth about him, this like nonchalance. And I think this is kind of the way that Tolkien is telling us how to die. Live your life so courageously and so boldly and so vigorously that when you die, you have this youthful glow still about you. His face was fair and young, save that a peace lay on it beyond the reach of youth. And I just think this is so fascinating. In both cases, there's light glowing on their faces, but in one person, they look old and decrepit and they look like they should die. In the other one, there's a peace on it that surpasses all youth. And this is the character who I think we're supposed to strive after. It's the Theoden. That's how we're supposed to live. And it's a struggle too, because sometimes at the end of our life, there's all this idea of legacy and what are we going to do? And like, what's the legacy that's going to be told about us when we die? I don't think we should necessarily focus so much on that. I think we should focus on the things that Theoden is focusing on. which is just virtue and doing the right thing, even if you're scared of it. That's why Théoden's charge is probably one of the most emotional moments that I've ever read in the books, because he is at this place where he's old and he's decrepit and he doesn't look very great and healthy. And then all of a sudden to this one point where he's almost cowering. He says he's hunched over the books when he's looking at this army, and then all of a sudden this great boom kind of awakens him and he stiffens up, and then he rides straight through, and no one can outmatch his pace because he is heading straight for the army of Minas Morgul. And it's just such a beautiful section that he dies with this youth still in him, and Denethor dies like an old man. And I don't know what is there about this, but I don't know why I just cannot get this out of my head. I just think it's such an interesting and important thing that Tolkien is trying to communicate to us. And I haven't really quite figured it out. So part of this video is just to ask you guys to help me. What else do you see here? What is Tolkien really trying to communicate about death and old age and your physical looks when you die? Because I think there's something there that I haven't quite put my finger on. So I'm kind of circling a lot in this video. But let me know what you think about in the comments. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. You can also subscribe if you made it this far in the video. You can also like the video or become a member or donate to any specific video that you want. Let me know what you guys think. And as always, remember to look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and will ever be. I'll see you guys in the next one.